Okay, there's two things that you're going to do for your next unit and test. Number one, you want to be able to come up with graphs for sine and cosine. And number two, you want to be able to solve equations for sine and cosine. And both of these are very, very doable for you. You have the background. Today we won't get to the assignment, but we will get to the why it works out the way it does. And here's what I want you to understand. The graph of sine. Over here, draw the unit circle. Don't need to be nervous. Can somebody tell me what is this coordinate right there? Very good, 1, 0. What's that coordinate right there? 0, 1. This one. And this one. Very good. Now, I also want to talk about the angles, and we're going to talk about the angles in radians, not degrees. There's going to be a time we go back to degrees, but not right now. This is 0 radians. This is 90 degrees, but how many radians is 90 degrees? Pi over 2. How about here? Pi. How about here? Three pi over 2, and how about here? 2 pi all the way around. So when we talk about y equals sine of x, that graph, what we do is we plug in an angle in for x, and an angle that's in radian measurement, and we come out with a value. Now, do you remember the coordinate? Which one is sine? Is sine the x value or the y value? Sine is the y value. Yep. So can you see like things we just talked about in this past unit that help us with what we're doing now? A little bit of the unit circle, sine being the y value, degrees to radians. That's why you had your first unit. So look at what's going to happen. I'm going to mark this off, and I'm going to look at the sine values, okay? At 0 degrees, or at 0 radians, what's the y value? 0. At pi over 2, what's the y value? 1. So what happens? It goes from 0 to 1, so it goes from smaller to bigger. What then happens is it goes over here? It gets smaller. It goes to 0, right? And then it goes smaller to -1. Then it goes from -1. Yeah, so look at sine goes from 0 up to 1. Then it goes from 1 down to 0. Then it goes from 0 down to -1. Then it goes from -1 up to 0, right? And that's what we're going to show. And if we continue to go around the circle many, many times, you would just repeat that over and over, right? So we're going to mark off 2 pi to say that's how long it takes before it starts itself over again. And then I'm going to divide 2 pi into 4 parts. If I divide it in half, I get pi. If I divide that in half, I get pi over 2. Those represent my 4 quadrants. I'm going to mark the same thing on the other side. -2 pi, -pi, -pi over 2, -3 pi over 2. Can somebody remind me what's the biggest value that I get for sine if it's the y value? What's the biggest it gets? That's the angle. What's the biggest y value that I have on the coordinates? 1. That's the largest it gets. The largest value can be is 1. What's the lowest value it can be? -1. And now I'm going to start to plot points. At 0 radians, what's the y value? 0. At pi over 2 radians, what's the y value? 1. At pi radians, what's the y value? 0. At 3 pi over 2, what's the y value? At 2 pi, what's the y value? You guys are exactly right. It makes a wave. And I'm going to tell you why this is kind of cool here in a second. But before I do that, let's go backwards. I want to show this side. If we follow the pattern and I move to the left, do you think I move down or to the middle or up from here? Follow the pattern of the wave. Yep, I move down here. Where do you think I go after that? To the middle. After that, up. And after that, middle. You guys are doing well. We're not going to take too long today, but we're going to use some of these basics. The maximum value of sine is 1. What's the minimum value? -1. What's the amplitude? The amplitude is the distance from the center to the top or the distance from the center to the bottom. It is 1. And then the period is how long it takes before it repeats itself. And every 2 pi units, it repeats itself. That's over the interval from -2 pi to 2 pi. Don't worry about it. We won't do the INT, okay? Nope, don't worry about it. Cosine of x. We're going to look at that one. Cosine is just slightly different. I want you to look at this right here. In order to find sine, what value did we look at? The x or the y. So to find cosine, we're going to look at, so cosine doesn't start at 0. Cosine starts at 1. And then after 1, it goes to 0. Then after 0, it goes to -1. And after -1, it goes to, and after 0, it goes to 1. So we're going to be able to stretch this about the same as we did the other one. We'll go to 2 pi. We'll go to -2 pi. Divide that in half. Why did I divide it into 4 parts? To represent the 4 sorts of the Q quadrants. We said the biggest value was 1. The least value is -1. And again, to let you write that down, do I look at the x value or the y value? So where do I start? I start up at 1. Then at pi over 2, I go to 0. Then at pi, I'm at -1. Back at 0. Do you see the pattern? How it just bounces back and forth between those maximums and minimums, and it has to cross over in the middle? It looks very similar to your sine graph, doesn't it? Watch, I'm going to pick it up. I'm going to drag it. Here it is. We're comparing it to the blue. If I simply just move it to the right, oh, it's the same stinking thing, isn't it? Cosine is the same as sine. It's just shifted. It's shifted horizontally. That's all the difference is. It has a maximum value of 1, a minimum value of -1. The amplitude is 1, and the period is 2 pi. I don't want to get too far ahead because we have a lot of people who are gone today, but I'm going to teach you just the basic parts of identifying the first things, okay? Now, are you ready to be somewhat confused and scared? Okay. Don't write that down. Don't write that down. Folks, you're going to graph that next week. That looks scary, doesn't it? Folks, we're going to get you to be able to do that. That's fine. We're going to get you to where you're able to do that. Trust me. Trust me and believe, okay? All right? Owen might not because he's checking out Sports Center right now, but the rest of you might be able to, okay? All right? Bump, I got your notes right here, okay? So the question is, what happens if we put different numbers there? Okay, so for example, what if we had y is equal to 4 sine of 8x? How would the graph look different if we put numbers in there? The amplitude is the absolute value of the number that sits in front. And by the way, these are all notes that you get on the test. I will give to you the sheet of notes here on Monday. So you look at the number out front, and the absolute value of that, that's going to be the amplitude. The second thing that we do is we identify the period. The period is 2 pi divided by whatever b is. B is the number that is multiplying x. For both sine and cosine. Our goal on Monday is going to be able to graph sine and cosine, where we just change the amplitude and the period. Everybody have that written down? Okay, so we'll try this activity and we'll end with this for today. Y equals sine of 4x. The amplitude is the absolute value of the number in front of sine. So it's a 1. The period is 2 pi divided by the number in front of x. So 2 pi over, can we reduce 2 pi over 4? Yes, to pi over 2. Good. Look at number 2. What's the amplitude? It is 1. The period is 2 pi divided by 5. You can't simplify that, can you? So you just leave it. Number 3, amplitude, 1. Period, just 2 pi. Number 4, amplitude, 4. Period, 2 pi. Good. Number 5, amplitude. The amplitude will always be positive because it's the absolute value of A. Even if there's a negative, you take the absolute value, you get positive. What's the period? 2 pi. Folks, when I copied this information, they gave you negative 1s on the inside. You'll never be given a negative 1 on the inside. So we'll just make it 2 sine of 4x. Sorry about that. What's the amplitude for number 6? 2. What's the period? Good. 2 pi over 4, which reduces to pi over 2. Good work. Let's try one that's a little bit more challenging. What's the amplitude for number 7? It is 3. I need to find the period. I take 2 pi and I divide it by what? 2/3. How do I do 2 pi divided by 2/3? I multiply by the reciprocal, multiply by 3/2. So what's 2 pi times 3? 6 pi divided by 2, 3 pi. How about the amplitude for number 8? 4. Period. 2 pi over 5. And finally, number 9, amplitude. period pi. Okay, we're not going to come up with the equation, but we are going to identify the amplitude period by looking at. What do you think the amplitude is for number 10? It is 3. How about for number 11? What do you think the amplitude is? It's 4. How about for number 12? The amplitude is 2. And how about for number 13? The amplitude is 5. Good. Now, the period for 10, as we look at it, it's how long it takes before it repeats itself. So it has to go through a full cycle where it goes up and it goes down. So what is that mark right there? If this mark is 2 pi, what's this mark right here? 1 pi. So that period was pi. So see, from here to here, that's 2 pi, and it repeats itself twice. So it's going to do it. It's going to do 1 cycle within 1 pi. Look at this one. This one starts up here, and when does it? So that's a full cycle for that graph. Yep, that's 2 pi. Good. Okay, so let's answer Ethan's question, because Ethan's asking a question that I'm guessing probably a third of the people have. So let's make sure we get it. Okay, all right. So Ethan is wondering, how did we know that? Ethan, am I at the top, middle, or bottom? I'm at the top. Am I headed up or down? Down. When do I get to the point where I'm at the top and heading down again? You tell me when I get to that point. When I get to that point, tell me to stop. Okay, so here's the deal. I've gone from x equals 0 to x equals 2 pi. That distance is 2 pi. So I have covered one period there. Cosine starts up, goes down, and comes back up, whereas sine starts in the middle. So it's a different type of graph. You see that? All right, look at number 12. What's the period for 12? How long does it take before it does one cycle? 4 pi. It is 2 pi. Last question. Look at number 10. Do you think it's a sine graph or a cosine graph? Sine. Why, Morgan? Because it starts in the middle. Do you think it's a sine or a cosine graph? Cosine. It starts up here. Think it's a sine or cosine graph? Sine. It starts in the middle. Sine or cosine? Cosine. So cosine starts at the top or bottom. Sine starts at the middle. Good job, folks. That's a nice introduction for today. Okay, good work. We're going to pick this up again on Monday.